Thanks, Tamara. Hey everyone, welcome back to another live community classroom with Michaels. Today we have Tamara from Moogly with us, ready for another exciting class. Today we'll be crocheting the Bow Ram U crochet sheep toy. My name is Lillian from Yarnspirations, and I'll be helping with any questions you might have during today's class. Feel free to ask questions in the chat here, and we'll be sure that Tamara answers them. While we're giving you some time to join the class, feel free to let us know where you're watching from. And just a reminder that today's class is being recorded, and you can find the recording at michaels.com/classes. Back to you.
All righty. So like I was just saying, if you just got here, we are talking about the Ba Ram U crochet sheep toy. And I'm so proud I got that all out in one go. Super cute though, right? Check this out. It has this great texture. It basically feels like a sheep. It is incredibly soft. I really wish we had like feel-o-vision so you guys could feel it right now. But it's made in 2 colors right here with just a little bit of extra touches and a little bit of black worsted weight yarn right here. So like I say, right now, this yarn is just brand new in stores. It's just hitting stores right now, just hitting Michael's. So today, for demoing purposes, I'm going to be using Bernat pipsqueak. So you can see right here, which is another beautifully textured yarn. So the tips are going to be pretty much the same when you're working with textured yarns, and I'll be able to demonstrate some of the stitches. Now, this pattern does take over 3 hours to make, so we're not going to be able to make the whole sheep today. But I want to, like I say, share some of my best tips for working with textured yarn, some of my best tips for working, making stuffies or amigurumi style things. And then we can go over, like I say, some of the tougher parts of the pattern. And if you have any questions, please do go ahead and put those in the chat. And I'll be stopping every so often so Lillian can help me answer those for you. So with all that said, let me set these aside here, and I'm going to pull over my camera, and then we'll go ahead and switch. All right. Didn't want to make anybody seasick there while I moved it around. All right, now we've got another look at that sheep here. So you can see we've got just those 2 colors of the yarn, and now you can really see that texture. Isn't that gorgeous? Perfect for a sheep, right? And so very, very soft. This is a super bulky yarn. It is made of nylon, and each skein has about 149 yards. So you just need 1 ball of each color to make this sheep. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you could get, probably a couple of sheep out of the grays at least. So let's go ahead and pull up some of the Bernat pipsqueak so that we can start one of the pieces. And when you signed up for the class, you should have gotten a copy of the pattern. I've got my copy right here. So if you still need that, hopefully they'll be dropping that in the chat if you do still need that link. But I'm going to, like I say, jump around a little bit since we can't make the whole sheep right here live. And I want to jump right on down to the face. The face starts out the exact same way as the body, so we'll be using all the same tips and stitches. In fact, it's all single crochet and single crochet 2 together, so you really only need to know those 2 stitches anyway, besides, of course, chaining and slip stitching. So let's go ahead and jump to the face and work that portion together. Just need to find the end of my yarn as well. So if you guys have had luck finding Bernat sheepy in your local Michaels, please do, let us know what you think of it. It is such a really beautiful yarn, and I'm very much looking forward to giving it a try myself as soon as I can. So to begin the face, I'm going to start with my hook here. Now, the original pattern calls for a USL hook, which is the size recommended for Bernat sheepy. I'm using an I because this is the size called for with the pipsqueak. So let's see here. Oh, Louise G said she did find it at her Michaels. Lucky you, Louise. I can't wait to try it. All right, so I've got my slip knot, and you can see right away here, I'm not going to be able to see my individual stitches with this yarn. What we're going to do is we're going to be using our sense of touch. So I'm going to chain 2, and as soon as I've changed that first one, I'm going to give it a little pinch with my fingers. And I can feel that between my thumb and my finger here, I can feel that this is the back loop, and those 2 top loops of the chain are right there. So I can just pinch it and hold it still right there. Then I'm going to chain 1 more. So that is 2 chains right there. Then I am going to work 6 single crochets into the second chain from the hook. Now that's the one we've got pinched. Because I've pinched it, I can put my hook right there and feel that I go under just that back loop right there. Now I can go back and show you the slip knot, but I am going to tell you right now, if you have not crocheted before, then you are going to want to start learning with a much smoother yarn. because we aren't going to be able to see our stitches with this yarn. Oops, I just did it without, without thinking while talking there. Because we're not going to be able to see our stitches with this yarn. If you are just learning to crochet, I really recommend that you try, even if you're trying out this pattern, that you try it with a smooth yarn, like a Red Heart Super Saver or Red Heart with Love or something without all this texture. So to make a slip knot, real quick, I'm going to take the end of my yarn. I'm going to come in about 6 or 7 inches or so. And I make a loop, just passing it right over like that. And then pull that strand behind the loop, like so. And then pull that right up through the middle. I know that's hard to see, again, kind of the foibles of textured yarn. If you have trouble making a slip knot, if you're not familiar with it and you want to just go ahead and move on with the pattern, you can always just tie a double knot in a loop. Just leave enough room for your hook to sort of move around in there. A little trick that a lot of beginner crocheters do it. So there we go. Good. I hope that's helpful. All right, so let's go back to our pattern here. We're going to chain 2, 1 and 2. And you notice I pinched that first one I made. And I'm going to go right under that back loop with my hook. Let me pull it up a little closer there so you can see. There we are. So I've got just that loop over my hook. And I'm going to make my first single crochet, just a standard single crochet. But what I want to do anytime I work with textured yarns like this is my first tip: stitch markers, stitch markers, stitch markers. It doesn't matter what brand, whatever you like to use. I do, however, recommend that they are the style that looks like basically, well, it's kind of hard to see against my hand. Let's try that one. The kind that looks like basically a safety pin. In fact, you could use safety pins if you don't have stitch markers available. What we want to do is we really want to mark our stitches. With textured yarn, like I say, when you can't see the individual stitch, these stitch markers can be a real lifesaver. So there we know is the top of our first single crochet. So I'll get my yarn back on my hook here. And now, because I've got that first stitch in there, it's a lot easier to feel where that one's coming out. So I can put my hook right back in there and make the next 5. And when you work this many stitches into one chain like this, it will work around that chain and create a circle. So that would be 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6. And I really do recommend that when you're working with this yarn that you know, this isn't, we'll put it this way, it's not a Netflix pattern. You're going to want to be able to pay some attention and when you're working with textured yarns like this, and really do count your stitches, because it's going to be really difficult to go back and count them after you've made them. So after you've made your 6 stitches, I do recommend you put a stitch marker as well in that last stitch. Right there. Now, as I say, we've got 6 stitches here, but you can't really see them. But if you give them a feel, really pinch between your fingers, you can kind of feel where it gets a little thinner right underneath each set of loops. And that is that opening that we're used to using for our hook when we make single crochets. So to finish up round 1, I'm going to go ahead and join with a slip stitch. With some amigurumis, you don't join with a slip stitch. Some are worked spiral, but this one we're going to join with a slip stitch. So you just need to insert that hook basically right where that first stitch marker is, because that's nice and marked, and make your slip stitch. And one of the reasons I really like to mark both the first and last stitch here of the round is so that I don't accidentally end up counting that slip stitch as a stitch or working back into it. I'm going to take a little sip here after we finish round 1 and ask Lillian, are there any questions I can answer right away?
I think you're covering it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all just following along and soaking it in.
All right, great. Like I say, stitch markers, whatever brand, if you want to use paper clips or actual safety pins, whatever works for you, just make sure that they're the kind that are easy for you to open, because we're going to be moving them around a lot. The other thing I want to say is, as we continue working with this yarn, you want to, like I say, pay attention, count your stitches, but also relax a little bit. If you can't see where that stitch went in, then nobody else can either. And if you've got the right numbers and it's turning out the right shape, then you're okay. So let's go ahead and move to round 2, where we're going to start with a chain 1. Oops, there we go. And then we're going to work 2 single crochets in each single crochet around. So again, you really just kind of want to concentrate and, you know, make sure that you're getting 2 in those stitches. So the first one's easy. We've got that one marked with our stitch marker. So after I make our first single crochet for round 2, I'm going to go ahead and move that stitch marker right on up to that new stitch. That's our new first stitch of the round. There we go. Like I say, we move these around a lot, so the kind that open up are just a little bit easier. So then we want to go right back down into that same space for a second one. Again, just kind of use your hook to feel where it wants to go in there at the base of the stitch. There we are. So there's 2 stitches in our first stitch. Again, like I say, you can't see where those stitches are, so nobody else can either. So let's go ahead and feel right there. And we're just going to put our hook, just put your hook sort of right where you think the next stitch should be and feel for where it opens up. Go ahead and work a stitch in there, and then a second stitch in there. So that's 2. So then we come over here and just sort of feel around between your fingers and your hook. Don't worry too much about, oh gosh, I wonder if I got that under the wrong loop. As long as you're making a nice circle, you should be all set. Now, I have totally lost count, in full disclosure, because talking and counting at the same time is really difficult, but I feel really good about this circle. I believe that as I go here into that last marked stitch for my last 2, it's a nice flat circle, I should be good. But if you want to count them, you can definitely try and sort of feel with your fingers to count those stitches as well. Another tip, if you are working with a white one of these, which is of course what the sheep body is made out of, is to make sure that you have a contrast color beneath you. So right now I'm working with gray, so having white underneath is really good because I can see my stitches. But if I'm working with white, when I'm working with white, I would put something underneath me, something with some color. And also just having bright light. The combination of the two will help you see them as best you can. So there we go. All right. That looks pretty good. Looks like a good flat circle. I'm going to go ahead and, yep, we already moved that stitch marker up. So let's go ahead and join with a slip knot right there. Now, if you do need to pull your stitches out with this, let me take a couple more and let's go ahead and pull them out. I'm just going to go ahead and take a single crochet right there. If you need to frog your yarn with this textured yarn, you can absolutely do it. You just want to make sure to do it a little bit slower. Don't just rip your stitches out, which is, if you're not familiar with the term frogging before, it comes from rip it or ribbit. But basically ripping out your stitches, you just want to take your time and do it a little gently. And then you should be able to get those stitches out of textured yarn pretty easily. So for round 3, we've got our chain 1, and then we're going to work 1 single crochet in the next single crochet and 2 in the next after that. And that should give us a total of 18 single crochets. So let's go ahead and do that together here. We're going to do our first one right in that first stitch and move that stitch marker up like so. And then again, just sort of try and feel where it feels like that next stitch we want to go. I just kind of lay my hook sometimes over that area and wiggle it a little bit, and it usually falls right into that stitch. So we had 1 stitch in the first, 1 single crochet in the first stitch, so we need 2 in the second. So there's our second one there. So that means for the next stitch, I can sort of feel over where that next one is. Got 1 there and 2 there. 1 and 2. And then 1 there and 2 there. Like I say, you really do just kind of want to concentrate. If you find that when you're making something, whatever you're making, whether you're making this pattern or something else, if you find that when you're trying to work flat, you're getting a cup that you didn't want or didn't expect, then my tip would be to just make sure that as you work your stitches with a textured yarn, you find my next one here to go into, you just want to make sure that you pull that loop up a little bit before you yarn over and finish the stitch. Sometimes we have a tendency when we're working with textured yarns to sort of just, see if I can do it here, pull it through and just keep it really tight up against our project. And what that does is it makes our stitches a little shorter, and it can really kind of shrink that stitch and keep it from laying the way it should. So give that one a tug before you pull it through, and then also at the end, give this one a tug to make sure that very top loop of the stitch isn't also too tight. So I believe I have 2 more here. 1, 2, and then 1 here. Oop. There we are. And then see if I can get into that very last stitch there. It's another good place where having those stitch markers can really help you figure out, or at least that first and last one, excuse me, where you want to put them. And don't be afraid to go ahead and use a stitch marker in every stitch of the round too. If you're really having trouble seeing where those stitches are, if it's your first time working with textured yarns, there's no reason you can't go ahead and put a stitch marker or a marker of whatever kind you're using in every single stitch as you go around. You'll see here, I started the body so that we can finish it up together. And I marked every one of the decreases as I'm finishing the body, just to help me really keep track and make sure I don't lose any stitches there. So I will go ahead and join with a slip stitch here. And yes, my little thing here, since I'm using a different yarn, is going to be a lot smaller than our example sheepy. So I am almost done here. Let's see, we'd have 2 more rounds to finish off our face. But basically, it's the same. We're just increasing in sort of a flat pattern here. So for round 4, it is 1 single crochet in each of the next 2, and then 2 in the one after that. So as much as possible, you just want to make sure to really concentrate on counting your stitches. Probably helps if you're not talking to people like I am while you're doing this, while you're counting those stitches, makes it a lot easier. But also use your tools to your advantage. You've got the paper that you printed the pattern out on and a pen. You can go ahead and sort of mark off those stitches, use the stitch markers. And then also you'll want to mark off your rows as you work, because it is very difficult to see, obviously, what row you are working on here as you crochet. So basically, we just continue on around, increasing according to the written pattern. And then I'm going to just finish up this round here and then talk a little bit about the embroidering. Were there any questions I could answer so far, Lillian?
You're doing great. We don't seem to have any questions.
Okay, great.
There was Elizabeth was late to join us and was just asking about which yarn you were using. So maybe you could recap a little bit about bernat sheepy.
Sure. Yeah, bernat sheepy is the one called for in the pattern. Unfortunately, I don't know about you guys, but I'm in Iowa and we have had so much snow. I wasn't able to get the yarn. It's just transportation is, shipping is a little difficult when you're in the middle of a blizzard. So I am using bernat pipsqueak right here. Let me hold that up again here. So it's a little different than the sheepy. The sheepy, I don't have the yarn itself, but I do have the sheep itself right here. So you get an idea, again, of what that looks like. It has really gorgeous texture, a little easier to see on the gray, on that really cute little face. Again, bernat sheepy is a super bulky yarn, about 149 yards per ball. And I don't know if they want me to mention this, but I was on Michael's site earlier today. And if you do have it in your store, it was on a BOGO, buy one, get one 50% off. So you need 2 colors, 2 balls to make this project. So there's your little tip. Yeah, so definitely do check that out. This one is currently exclusively at Michael's. So that's what it looks like worked up. Not sure yet what it'll look like in the ball, but it is a really gorgeous, fun yarn to work with. Yes, if you're using the sheepy, here, let's see. Let me pull that big old sheep back up here. You can see how big the face would be in sheepy and how little my one is here in the pipsqueak. Quite a bit smaller. This is a super bulky yarn, and the pipsqueak is, I want to double check, just a bulky. So a 5 versus a 6. So you're going to get a smaller one. But if you can't get a hold of this yarn and you've got some bernat pipsqueak in your stash, it is a really great substitute. You're just going to end up with a smaller little sheep. All right, so let's go ahead and pretend I have finished our little face here for the sake of time, since it's all just single crochets around and around and around. I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch that closed. Now, let me find my scissors here among all my stuff. When you are making a stuffy or an amigurumi or something where you're going to be attaching parts like this, another tip is when it's time to go ahead and cut the yarn for the parts, you want to leave a really long tail. Normally, I always say leave a 6-inch tail or so you can weave in your ends. Let's go ahead and leave, a 12, 18-inch tail for this one. the reason being, you can go ahead and just pull that right on up and through. You could pull it through the loop if you really want to, but it's not going to come undone, because then we can use that long tail to do the sewing onto our finished sheep. When we sew the gray part onto the white part, we make the white part usually first, then we make the gray parts and sew them on. And if you've got that long tail, then you don't have two more ends to weave in. It's just already right there. So you can go ahead and weave it in. So I saw a question come up, what's the difference between the texture? Yeah, I'll hold them right up here next to each other so you can get an idea of the difference. It looks like the bernat sheepy is chunkier, certainly. A little, I don't want to say coarser because it's incredibly soft. It's just bigger chunks of texture, I guess. And then you can see this one is a little bit more furry and fuzzy, little tufts of fur. The bernat pipsqueak is made out of 100% polyester, whereas the sheepy is nylon. So both very soft, both excellent choices, just a matter of what's available for you. So like I say, when you cut that yarn end, make sure you leave a nice long end. That's going to be a great way to go ahead and start sewing that on without having to make extra ends. As for weaving in your ends, when you do want to weave them in or when it is time to sew them on, you're going to want to have a bigger yarn needle. Yarn needles come in a variety of sizes, just like yarns. And if you typically only use thinner or smooth yarns, you may not have any quite as big. Let me grab from my little bowl here off to the side. This is sort of a more standard yarn needle right here. This one works great for worsteds on down. Well, it might have even something smaller for a thread, but you'll want something a little bit bigger to work with these bulkier yarns. This one is a Susan Bates finishing needle, and it's a great choice because you can really kind of open it up. Now, you do have to be gentle with them. I've broken more than a few of these when I was just being a little too rough or tried using them with a little bit too big of a yarn. But this can be a great tool to help you with those bigger yarns when you weave in those ends. Basically, it's just a needle with one big eye. So let's go ahead and just look at it here with this yarn. See how easy is that to thread, right? Super easy. And then you don't even really have to weave in these inside ends if you don't want to, because they're going to end up, just being held in place with fiber fill. Because we started with a slip knot, we don't have to worry about it coming out or anything like that. But if you wanted to, you could absolutely weave in some of these ends here before assembly. And you don't have to do too much. You don't have to go too crazy. This is one of the ones where you maybe don't need that full 6 inches because the texture is also going to help keep that woven in. So at this point, I would probably just go ahead and leave that just like that and use it as part of the stuffing. Save a little bit on the fiber fill right there. Just stuff it right in when it's time to sew it on. Now, before you sew it on, though, you're going to want to add the face. So before I do that, Lillian, were there any new questions?
I wish there were, but you've covered it.
That's fine.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, though, drop them in the chat. I've been tracking all your tips as we go.
Awesome. I saw that. Thank you. Okay. So basically for sewing on the little face, you can use any, whatever you've got in your stash. Some smooth black worsted weight yarn is what they recommend. I grabbed some Bernat Maker Home Deck. I think this one's a lot of fun for embroidering on faces. It's hard to see on camera. Black yarn is so difficult to see on camera. But if I hold it up here, I really like this one because it's got a little bit more body to it, so it doesn't disappear quite as much. That said, let me pull up the original sheep here. Ooh, this game tried to roll away on me right off my lap. You can see it does sort of just bury right down in there. So I would guess, whatever you've got on hand, Simply Soft, With Love, whatever, standard black worsted weight yarn you've got is great. So basically, they sewed on the eyes as well as just one line, a really simple line there for the mouth. I don't think there's any other detailing. I'm literally trying to pull apart the stitches here, but it looks like that is all the detailing they needed. Super cute. If you didn't want to embroider them, I wanted to give you another option you can pick up at Michael's. You can get some safety eyes. These are the ones from my own stash here. But if you wanted to, you could also use safety eyes for this project. Let me hold that up here. Safety eyes are basically the eyes you see a lot of times on toys, but they have a special backing. So unlike a button, they really, really won't come off your project unless you just rip them all the way straight through the fabric. So that is another option if you wanted to do that. Those are great for stuffies because, again, That's all going to be stuffed inside there. So it's, you know, it's not going to be poking out the other side of your project or anything. So let's go ahead and grab just a little bit of the black yarn here. And then we can talk a little bit about embroidering the face. Embroidering the face on amigurumis is genuinely, or stuffies, or whatever you want to call them, it's a bit of trial and error. I have often gone back and repositioned and redone and pulled out my faces many, many, many times. You know, you just want to get just that right attitude. And I think it takes a lot of practice to get those faces just the way you want them every time. So I would recommend that you start at the bottom of the mouth for this one right here and just pull. Oop. Let me get that one pulled out of the way there. We don't want to, you know, mess with our yarn we're going to use to sew with. If you are new to crocheting, I saw that worsted weight yarn, you want to look for the yarn symbol 4. It's a strange one. It's kind of a medium weight. You've got this right here, the bernat pipsqueak is a 5, a bulky. The sheepy is a super bulky, so it would have a 6 symbol on it, and worsted would have a 4 symbol on it. So I've just gone in about a row or so. I don't know, hard to tell. We'll say about a row. And then I'll go right to the middle for the mouth line and pull that right through. I probably cut off way too much yarn here. Don't need this much. There we go. And you can see, I really like that, the way the Bernat Maker home deck sort of pops out a little bit more and stands up. And then it's time to do the eyes. Let's see. What we want to do is sort of plot them out. If we go back and look at the original here, let's see, they were kind of just right there, a little above the mouth, about halfway towards the back. So that's what we'll want to do too. So we can use stitch markers if you want to. If you're real nervous about it, you can sort of say, okay, I want one eye here. Oh, there we go. And then mark out, you know, if you want the other side, the other eye on the other side. There we are. And sort of get yourself, you know, a vague idea, or you can definitely just eyeball it, whatever you prefer. But then for these eyes, what it looks like they did, they just come right up. And I didn't do anything fancy right there. I'm just coming right up from behind. All the ugliness on the back of this will be hidden inside the stuffy, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And there we go. We'll pull that through. And then just go back and forth in loops here. We're just going to basically whip stitch. The key, though, is to not pull it too tight. You don't want to leave it too loose. You don't want loops sticking out the front, but you don't want to pull so tight that you start squinching up the face. There we are. Isn't that cute? It's already reminding me a little bit of Lamb Chop. I might be showing my age there. I don't know if anybody else here remembers Lamb Chop the puppet.
Oh my gosh. I loved Lamb Chop when I was a kid. I watched it on repeat.
Oh, absolutely. I loved everything. Yes, I was the exact same way. So yeah. So you can definitely make some little lamb chop eyes here, make great big eyes. If you make a lot of stuffies, there's some really fun, you know, special eyes you can make. But for this guy, we're just going to keep it kind of simple and just basically keep going around here until you've got the size of eye you want.
There's a question here from Barbara. Mm-hmm. She asks, is the black knotted?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Right now, it is just an end down here. I would probably weave it in a little bit and knot it before I sew it to the project. I don't want, especially that end, just being loose inside. But not yet. Not yet. But it would be, oops, before we put it all together. There we go. You could knot it. You could weave it in, whatever you want. That really is sorry, getting a little, my ends crossed. There we go. That really is part of the fun of projects like this. You don't have to worry about what's on the inside. You can send this yarn over here and then just kind of weave it in a little bit and send it over there and do whatever you need to do. So now I want to go to the other eye. I don't want to cut my yarn and weave in those ends. So I'm just going to send it right inside a couple of these stitches to tack it down on the inside here. Excuse me. There we are. And pull that all the way through. Excuse me, I need to take a little sip of water. We're used to humidity in Iowa with all this snow. It's been ironically very, very dry. Excuse me. All right. So then we just kind of eyeball it, no pun intended, and decide that looks like it's about the same space here on the opposite side, and start making that eye as well. Excuse me. Dry throat today. So I'm just going to take a couple more here. And yeah, so like I said, you can kind of play with this, rearrange. If you don't like it, go ahead and pick those stitches out using your yarn needle. Redo your eyes, your mouth until you're happy with them. Or, you know, you could have a lot of fun. Some people use embroidery thread and get really fancy with their stuffy faces. But I do think that with yarn as textured as this, you're going to have a hard time getting the embroidery thread to show up. Maybe if you did a great big eye and then just did some detailing. There we are. So there's 1, 2, let's do one more loop there. And then we'll go ahead and finish it off. There we are. Like I said, I cut this one way longer than necessary, but always better than having to weave in an extra end, right? There we go. Okay, so now to secure these on the inside, it should be, I just saw the question pop up. If your face is, it should cup a little bit like this, but you don't want it if it's on, you know, if it's way too narrow, that might not be good. I will say textured yarns like this do tend to have a bit of stretch. In particular, nylon is known for its stretch. So you can use this fiber fill to sort of shape it as you go as well. So here we are on the back. And yeah, I will go ahead and just kind of weave that in. Go ahead and knot it. Like I say, if you want to, it's all going to be on the inside of a stuffed animal. So you don't have to make your ends real pretty for this one, which is always kind of fun. Just sort of tack it down until it's secure. You know it's not going to come out on your stuffed animal, and then you can trim that off. And then on the other end there, since it's just hanging out by itself, my needle wanted to fall on the tape or on the floor for me. You know how those yarn needles are, always trying to wander off. So for this one, I'll just go ahead and send it right into those stitches. Now, because I can't really see, you know, what stitches I'm going into, you do want to double check and make sure. If you can't see your needle on the good side, you're probably not going to be able to see that yarn once you pull it through. Again, for those who missed it, this is a Susan Bates finishing needle. There's a little harder to see against the white background. The great thing is you can get a multi-pack with a variety of sizes for all the different weights of yarn. So the only yarn I think doesn't quite work with it is maybe Bernat Blanket Big. That one's just too big for any yarn needle I've found yet. So, alrighty, there we have our little face. So I'm going to take a little sip of yarn, or excuse me, a little sip of water, and ask Lillian if there were any other questions that I may have missed.
There's a question here from Valentine. They said, I'm on round 3. If my face is cone shaped, am I crocheting too tight?
It should be, I want to say more of a bowl than a cone, if that makes sense. You want some gentle shaping, sort of like this, but if it's more like that, then yes, you'll want to make sure to really, as I say, as you make each one of those stitches, just kind of give a little tug and make sure that you're not staying too close to the fabric, and that should usually help with that quite a bit. So, okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and set aside our face. And if we come to the pattern, you can see here, let me go ahead and kind of hold that up here where we can see. Each of the sections are listed separately. You can absolutely make each of these sections in any order you like. I do recommend that you make all 4 of the feet before you add any of them, because with the feet, you really want to sort of tack those on. Same thing with the ears, since there's 2 of them. Anytime you've got a multiple of something like that, make them all before you start sewing them to the body, because, you know, you're going to end up sewing one of them basically in the wrong place. It's just kind of, you know, you're going to get one on there and go to put the second leg on or whatever and say, oh gosh, now that one needs to be a little over. It's just much better to make them all before you start sewing them together. So let me set this aside a little bit here, and then I'm going to bring up the fiber fill. And if you haven't worked with fiberfill before, it comes in great big bags that you can get right on michaels.com and probably in store as well. And this is essentially what it looks like when it comes out of the bag. It's the stuffing that you find inside stuffed animals. You can use them to stuffed pillows, whatever you like. And what I like to do when I work with stuffing is when I am making something like this, I like to tear it into smaller pieces before I start stuffing it in. This avoids getting lumpy things. You can see how it really kind of wants to clump into these big lumps. If you stuff just like this, and the big lumps into your amigurumi or your stuffy, then it may end up feeling lumpy on the outside. So you really want to sort of tear it into smaller bits before you start stuffing. Now, right here, I've got my little bernat pipsqueak body, and this one has been worked through, well, it would have been basically on the pattern instructions where it starts saying right there, stuff body firmly. So you want to start stuffing the body before you make those last few decrease rounds, because otherwise, basically, you're going to be trying to get all that stuffing through a tiny little hole at the very end. I did see a question come up, can you use yarn scraps? You absolutely can. Just keep in mind, now with this yarn, it might not be an issue, but sometimes with stuffies, you can see a little bit in between the stitches. So if you have the same color or something like that, that can be helpful too. Another tip is if you want to add a little weight to your stuffy, you can get little plastic pellets, weighted pellets, and that will give your stuffy sort of that heavier feeling that you get sometimes when you get stuffed animals from the store, how they sort of want to sit a little bit. If you want to add those, you can absolutely add those. My favorite container to put those in, because you don't want to put them directly in your stuffy because the little balls can come out between the stitches. My favorite tip is to use an old pair of knee highs. I used to be able to get those 25-cent eggs. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Those legs eggs at the drugstore or at the convenience store. And it was about 25 cents for a pair of knee highs. I don't even know if they make them anymore. But cheap knee highs, if you've got them in your drawer or somewhere, put those pebbles in there, tie it nice and tight shut, and then surround that with some stuffing, and it'll hold all of those in place, and it's something you've already got on hand. So just keep stuffing it, and the instructions do say to stuff it firmly. So that means you can go ahead and keep stuffing it more and more and more than you'd think. Fiberfill and this sort of stuffing comes in really great big bags. I've got a full one right here. See if I can even get it on camera. It's massive. Woo! It is a great big bag. So don't be afraid to keep on stuffing, definitely. Keep on stuffing it in there. Oh, I saw Dollar Tree still has, I hope that's the knee highs. Dollar Tree still has the knee highs. They're still out there somewhere. Good to know. So you can see as I'm stuffing this here, it really does sort of change and really emphasize the shape that I'd been crocheting here. So you can make it as soft or as hard as you'd like. You know, stuffing firmly is a little bit of, personal, what do you call firm? What's too firm for you? But you want to really stuff it in there as much as you can. The more you get in there, the better shape typically you're going to have. You can see right now it is nice and very squishy. So I want to squeeze in a little bit more before I'm done, but I've got some more crocheting to do. There's 3 more rounds before we finish off. So you can see I've got lots and lots of stitch markers here. I mentioned at the beginning that as I've been making the decreases, I've made 3 decrease rounds. I marked each one of those decreases with a stitch marker, which really helps me because I really don't want to miss any stitches here. I also held the loop open with a stitch marker so I wouldn't lose it. So let me get this back on my hook here. There we are. And then it looks like I need to slip stitch. This is something else. I haven't slip stitched this row yet because I color coordinated the stitch markers. I've got the pink ones for my first and last stitch and the blue ones for all the decreases. Of course, this one is a decrease as well, but that really helps me too to know when I've begun and ended those rounds. So because I've got my 2 pink ones here, I know I still need to slip stitch, which as you're going can get a little harder to tell as well. There we are. That came through nice and easy. And then we're going to pick up the pattern right there, right underneath where I drew the asterisk right there. Our next round, our third to the last decrease round, where we chain 1 and work 1 single crochet in each of the next 2 and then single crochet 2 together. So I wanted to make sure we went over how to do that. So let's start with a chain 1, just as before. And I'm going to be working with the fiberful in here, and it's going to try and push up on your fingers. But if you just sort of keep tucking it down so that you're just holding the crochet fabric as you work around, it's a little bit easier. Like I say, we'll take more opportunities to keep adding more stuffing as we go. So I'm going to start by crocheting in the first 2 stitches here. Of course, the stitch marker wants to be in my way. So we'll pull that through. And I think I missed a question there while I get that first stitch in. Lillian, can you help me with that?
Yeah, there's a question here from Joey asking, when crocheting the rows, do you crochet through both top loops?
I do. If you're familiar with amigurumi, sometimes you'll see amigurumi patterns where they have you work in the back loop only. That's a really typical thing to see in those patterns, but especially for this, I would recommend working through both of those loops. You're not going to get that same ridged look with this fabric regardless. And it just creates a little bit more solid fabric if you work under both of those loops, and you're less likely to have fiber fill or whatever your stuffing is peeking through. So I've got 1 stitch here, and now I've got my second single crochet. That said, I will say this. If you find that, you know what, I think that stitch was only 1 loop and the rest are under 2, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Again, with this yarn, you can't tell, so not a problem. So I've got my single crochets in my first 2 stitches there, and now it's time for a decrease. So I'm going to go into that next stitch, the one right before the stitch marker here, and pull up a loop, and then I'm going to go into the same stitch as my stitch marker. That's why I love having these decreases marked, because I know this is that stitch right there where I'll end my decrease. So I'll yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops, essentially turning those 2 stitches now into just 1. So I'm going to go ahead and move that stitch marker on up to our decrease for this row. And that way too, like I say, especially as you're working here at the end, you don't want to lose track of your stitches. You'll always know you end that decrease in your next stitch marker. So we've got 1, and then kind of have to just kind of finagle it and keep moving your hands around here with these big bulky yarns and textured yarns. Sometimes you have to adjust and keep pushing that fiber fill in back out of the way a little bit so it doesn't get caught in your stitches. And then here we are, time for another decrease. So we go into that. Let me actually pull up a little background since we're working with white now. This is what I was talking about. It's a little harder to see on the white. So I'm just going to put up a piece of mailing paper here, basically, to give us a little contrast. So now hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to see. We go into that first one and pull up our loop, 2 loops still on the hook. Go into that one right there, yarn over, pull up that loop, and yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's a single crochet 2 together decrease. If you are a more experienced crocheter and you're familiar with the invisible decrease, you could try that, but it isn't going to help you really with this yarn. Again, you're not going to be able to see it in that level of detail. So I wouldn't worry about trying to do anything too fancy with this. And that's part of the joy of it. You get these really cute, amazing textures and finishes and stuffies without having to use really complicated stitches. So as I go around, I just keep moving my stitch markers up every time I make one of those decreases, and just keep sort of pushing that stuffing back out of the way. Let's see. Go ahead and feel for those stitches if you need to. Like I say, you can really use those stitch markers to sort of visually tell you, okay, I know I've got to have 1 more stitch here before this stitch marker to make this decrease. So I can just sort of put my hook right there in the middle, and lo and behold, there's the hole for it. Right there. And like I say, don't give it too much stress if you're going into exactly the right spot, because in the end, odds are no one will be able to tell. So let's see, we've got, looks like 2 more little sections here before we finish this row. And you can see here, some of my stuffing's trying to escape. Not a big deal. Just push it back in there. If you find it's a little too difficult for you to have it really full of stuffing while you're crocheting, that's fine. You can sort of half stuff it. You don't have to stuff it, you know, to the maximum here until we get right to the end. So pull up some more yarn here. Lots of things on the table at this point. Move that stitch marker up. And then we've got our last little section. So I know I only have 4 stitches here and the last one's there. So we've got 1 and then 2 and then our decrease. So there's into the 3rd one and there's into the 4th one, and pull those together. So with these decreases, you'll notice this starts shrinking again really fast, basically working the opposite of what we did with our increases. So now we are ready to slip stitch at the end of this round. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that slip stitch nice and tight. We're not working into any of our slip stitches here, so you don't have to worry about making those loose at all. You can go ahead and give your yarn a tug and really close up those rows. So at this point, if you need to, you can keep adding a little bit more stuffing. I'm probably going to work another row here before I add more. So let's go ahead and make the second to last round. We're going to chain 1 and then just single crochet in the next stitch and then single crochet 2 together. So again, I want to move that first stitch marker on up right there. And then single crochet 2 together, ending up with the second half there right in that marked stitch. So at the end of this round, you'll have the first and last stitch marked, but also every other stitch. So let's see, let's do this next section together. We'll have our 1 single crochet and then our single crochet 2 together. So we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller here. And I just want to work through these last few rows here of the body so I can show you how to close this up when we get to the end here. So single crochet 2 together. Kind of looking at my stitches right now. So Lillian, if you could let me know if there's any questions that pop up.
Yeah, there's just one here from Barbara. She said that she was using bernat blanket yarn as a substitute. That's a good idea as well.
That would be such a big fluffy sheep. Yeah, that would be amazing. I can only imagine how big that would end up being and how cuddly. So fun. I really do enjoy, that's another yarn I really do also enjoy using for stuffed animals. I've made a few with bernat blanket, so a few sea creatures that are a lot of fun. So we're coming around here. Got just a couple more to go, I hope. You can see our stuffing really kind of wants to come out. We just keep pushing it down in there. Let's see. And then Lillian, I'm going to have to let you answer Diana M's question. I don't know the answer to that one.
Oh, yes.
Technical stuff.
I don't think we can transfer the tips over there. So I think they're just here in this chat. I'll have to check to see if the chat shows in the video. I think it might just be the main screen. So I'm not sure that they would appear in the recording. There is a question here from Barbara asking if you're going to show how to join the pieces together.
I'm hoping to, yes. I know we're running slowly out of time. Just, you know, like I say, no way to get through this whole little sheepy in 1 hour. But I have finished off that one. So we've got really just one round left. You can see here now, there's only 12 stitches in this round right here. So now is your last chance really to go ahead and add your fiber fill. So if there's a little bit more that you want to add, go ahead, get those little last guys in there. And don't be afraid to, especially when you're making the smaller pieces. I didn't get any feet made, but especially something like feet where it's more like a tube, you can absolutely use your crochet hook to help get that stuffing in there and help really distribute it if you need to, and sort of help get as much stuffing as you'd like to have in there. So when you've got as much stuffing as you feel like you would like to have in there, then it's time for this final round. So it looks like I got my chain 1 here for a little bit of height. So then we're just going to single crochet 2 together 6 times. So I'm not going to keep moving up all my stitch markers. Just going to go ahead and do this one. That one was to come out already anyway. There we are. So just go straight into a single crochet 2 together and get that one marked. So there's our first one. And then jump on over here. We've got 1, 2 for that one. I'll go ahead and, yeah, let's just get these stitch markers out of there. Get that decrease made there. And just a couple more, 3 more to go. It looks like we're halfway there. So like I say, it can be really helpful because it would be really difficult to look at this and say how many stitches are there, but I know it's really just that one in the middle and then this one right here. And then we can get that one out of the way. And finally, we've got 1 and 2. Get that one out of the way. And then our very last one. All right, made it around. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that last stitch marker out of the way as well. And you can see just how small that is. So you've got probably one more chance if you really want to stuff some more stuffing in there, but I'm gonna say this guy is good. So now for this one, we aren't gonna be using this tail end to sew anything on. So you can go ahead and cut that a little bit shorter, but you do want to leave, you know, a good amount. And then if you'd like, you can pull that end through this loop, or you can just pull this loop right on up. And then we'll get it on our yarn needle here. Let's see. I'm not sure. The fiberfill I know is washable. I'm assuming the sheepy is washable as well. Can you speak to that a little bit more, Lillian? I don't have the label in front of me to check.
I also don't have the label in front of me.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's nylon. It's 100% nylon. And you know what? I do remember that it was certified to be safe from harmful contaminants, meaning it was safe for babies. So that means it's got to be washable.
Yeah, you'd definitely be able to like.
That's the logic.
Yeah, you'd definitely be able to like cold hand wash it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I say, fiberfill is generally considered washable as well. Just want to make sure to dry it really well. So I've got my tail end here and I've got this little hole. So there's a couple different ways you can do it, but the way I like to do it is just to go through each stitch from the outside towards the in, working my way around. Now I might not be going exactly into each stitch. It looks like each stitch from here with my lighting, but again, you can just sort of eyeball it. I might end up going to one stitch twice. There we are. Just feel wherever that yarn needle wants to go in. And then as you work your way around, you can start giving it a tug. Just gently start pulling it closed, a little bit at a time. You never want to pull too hard. You don't want to accidentally end up breaking the yarn, especially at this stage. What a bummer. So you just want to sort of give it gentle tugs as you work around, closing up that hole. And then as you get to the point where, you know, it's just that teeny little guy left, you can go ahead and just sort of go in there with your yarn or your yarn needle. Again, nobody's gonna be able to see the individual stitches in this yarn. So you just want to go around and close it up until a little fuzzy off there. Yeah. Until it is nice and closed up. And then you can weave in your ends. Now, weaving in the ends on an amigurumi can seem difficult since you don't have a backside that you can really get to, but I really like to just send that needle right on through the entire stuffed animal a little bit. And then I'll come back around this way. And maybe this time I'll run it sort of through those stitches from underneath, sort of feel with the needle. So it feels like you're going through those stitches in the opposite direction. And then maybe send it over here. Like I say, with these textured yarns, they're not gonna want to come undone on you anyway, unlike a slick yarn. But you just want to kind of go back and forth a few times in a few different directions. And then when you feel like that end is as secure as you need it to be, go ahead and give it a good tug so that it's pulling up out of the project a little bit, and then cut as close as you can to the yarn. We don't want to cut that texture, so take your time. Oop, and then my scissors open too much. There we go. And just cut real close. And then when you give it a squish, that little bit of the end should pull back to the inside and you've got your nice smooth shape. So let's jump back to our face and talk about sewing the pieces on and get those last stitch markers out of the way. We don't need those anymore. And I'm going to go ahead and get that paper out of the way a little bit so it's a little easier. Now we are actually going to use the stitch markers. We just didn't need those two in there, but we're going to use our stitch markers to help with placement. Again, if you don't have stitch markers, you could use pins or whatever you do have handy. I believe we probably want a little bit of fiber fill in here as well, but for now we want to get it lined up. Just sort of line it up right on the end of your sheep, and then use your stitch markers, your safety pins, or whatever you have available to help pin those two pieces together so that that applique or the part, the feet, the face, the tail, the ears, whatever it is, are held in place right where you want them as you sew. We don't want to go too close together. We want to leave a little bit of space in here because that's going to let us do our stuffing. But just go ahead and use those stitch markers to hold it together. So now you know exactly that's where I want my face to be. And if I had my, excuse me, if I had my other pieces made as well, I would probably go ahead and pin those on so I can check out the whole look and make sure everything's balanced and, you know, just exactly as I want it to lay out before I start sewing things on. So then when it's time to sew this on, if it's the feet, I would go ahead and stuff them before pinning them on. But since we've just got this sort of little flat face here, you can see here on the full-size one, I should point out, it's got quite a bit more stuffing because it's just plain bigger. But on our little guy, I'm just going to go ahead and stuff it in right from the side. Because now I know where it's right in place, and I want it to be stuffy, and it's going to hold it up a little bit, which would have made it difficult to pin on. But that will just sort of squish right down in as I sew around the edges. So let's get to that because I feel like that is probably one of the trickier bits of amigurumi. Once you've got it lined up, sewing it on, we're using those yarn needles again. We're going to go ahead and get our tail end on there. And then we're basically going to be doing what's called, well, you've got a couple different ways you could do it. You could do a whip stitch or you could do a running stitch. I personally prefer to do a whip stitch just because when I'm making a stuffy, I tend to always be thinking of kids. And I feel like it's just a really secure way to add your pieces. So what I'm going to do is I've got that long tail for my face, and I'm just going to catch a little bit of yarn here. Again, I can't see where the rows are or anything, so just pick up a little bit of yarn right where nearby. And can you see there, that yarn needle coming out? I'm going to send it right on up through the gray. And then just pull that yarn right on through. Like so. And you can see that really does just kind of disappear right there. So then we just eyeball it and say, okay, come over to the side. You can go the other direction if you want to. As a crocheter, I think it's just, as a right-handed crocheter, it's normal for me to go right to left, but you could go left to right if you want. And we just pick up that next little bit, go through both layers, and gently pull that on through. Give it a nice little tug, and it's nice and on there. So as you work your way around, you can get those stitch markers out of the way. And, you know, as you come to the other side, you can add a little bit more stuffing if you want to, if you decide you want your face to stick out a little bit more. But you just keep picking up that little edge right there. Just make sure you don't get just the fuzz. You've got some actual yarn on the needle. Go through both of those layers right at the edge. And especially with this very forgiving yarn with all the texture, those stitches just disappear right along. So you can make those stitches as close together as you like if you really, really want to make them tight. But if you just work your way all the way around, you will have your little sheep face. And then it's like I say, same thing with the feet. The ears are even, and the tail are even easier because they're flat pieces. So for a flat piece, you just sew along one edge and then call it good. Weaving in your ends is exactly the same. I wouldn't send the gray through the body of the white, but I would send it behind that head a few times and sort of weave it in that way before I do the same thing to cut off that edge as well. So I think we have hit time. It is 6:59, and I hope I have hit most of my main tips here. I'm just going to kind of run over those here, the little list that I wrote out to make sure I didn't miss any. When you're working with a textured yarn, you want to make sure to use bright light. Have a contrasting background. So you saw when I used the white yarn, I had a brown background. Make sure to feel for your stitches. Use stitch markers. Use as many stitch markers as you've got. But at the same time, relax. If you can't see the stitches, they probably can't either. Make sure you have large enough yarn needles for your yarn, and use simple stitches and frog slowly, or pull your stitches out slowly when you're using these textured yarns. For stuffies and amigurumi, again, use your stitch markers to help with assembly. I do recommend that you make all your pieces before assembly so you can pin it together and see how it's going to look. Go ahead and stuff it firmly using the hook if you need to. And then also, you'll notice too, I want to point out I made the face on the face details, I should say, on the face before sewing it on. You always want to do any little embroidery bits like this on your small pieces before you sew them to the larger piece. Just a whole lot easier when you've got access to both sides like that. And then lastly, make sure you leave that long tail for sewing that bit on so you can avoid having more ends. So I think that's it. If we want to go ahead and come back up to me. There we go. I'll go ahead and move that out of the way and hold up our sheep one more time so everybody can see. Oh, there's a little bit of my yarn I used. There is the Ba Ram U crochet sheep toy from Yarnspirations. So thank you so much for joining me. I don't know if Lillian, you wanted to say anything else to everybody before we go?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks everyone for joining us today for this live community classroom with Michaels. We would love to see your whips, so please share your work with hashtag #MakeItWithMichaels and hashtag Yarnspirations. And just a reminder that you can find more classes on michaels.com and the recording from today's class at michaels.com/classes. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.